Welcome to another episode of the award winning 5,000 Role Models show on Miami-Dade College TV. We are honored to be joined by history maker, civil rights activist, the president and executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, Desmond Meade. Desmond, thank you so much for joining us.
Dr. Bright, how you doing today, man? Pleasure to be on.
I'm doing wonderful. You have such an amazing story, an amazing journey. Let's begin with where are you from and how would you describe your upbringing?
Well, I was born in U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Croix, but I came over to United States at a very young age, around like 5 years old, and raised in South Florida. Spent a little time in the Midwest in the Chicago area, but South Florida, Dade County, 305 is home to me, and it'll always be home.
In your book, the amazing book, Let My People Vote, you write about how some of your previous life experiences led you to some railroad tracks. Can you expound on that for our audience?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Dr. Bright. Unfortunately, at a young age, I started experimenting with drugs, and I ended up joining the military. And while in the military, I started using drugs even more, and it resulted in actually me getting in trouble in the military and getting eventually getting discharged, court martial and discharge. And when I returned home, I started, trying to pick my life back up, and I started bodyguarding. And in the midst of that, I started again using drugs. And eventually, in 1995, my mother passed away, and it was a very traumatic moment for me. And I dove headfirst into drug addiction. I mean, I was off the chain, so to say. And eventually, I ended up being homeless and living on the streets for quite some time, and getting arrested here and there, in and out of jail. And then eventually, in around probably 1999 to 2000, I got arrested, and I was charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. um After serving a little time there, I came back home and went right back to using drugs and being homeless. And this time it eventually led me to some railroad tracks in August of 2005. And I found myself standing in front of railroad tracks waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. At that time, I was at my lowest. I didn't have a job. I was unemployed, recently released from prison, all right, and addicted to crack cocaine. And, I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And I was ready to end my life. But thank God the train never came. And eventually crossed those tracks, walked a few blocks further, checked myself into drug treatment. And, after drug treatment, I moved into a homeless shelter, and I enrolled at Miami-Dade College, Wilson campus, because I wanted to do something to not use drugs again, something to raise my self-esteem. And so I enrolled in the paralegal program and graduated with, at the top of the class. And my professors encouraged me to continue my education. So I pursued a bachelor's in public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice. And I ended up graduating with highest honors again. And eventually I was accepted into law school at FIU College of Law. And in May of 2014, I graduated with a law degree.
That's awesome. And as fate would have it, we're on Miami-Dade College television. And I know that some of the student leadership positions that you were engaged in while you were a student at Miami-Dade College were pivotal. Can you talk about those experiences?
Yes, I think Miami-Dade College, that experience was a very defining experience for me. When I could tell you, Dr. Bright, when I first enrolled in Miami-Dade College, I was like so appreciative of the opportunity that I had because, prior to that, I thought I couldn't go to college. I'm no, I've been in jail and prison before, a recovering addict. I didn't think any colleges and universities wanted me, but I didn't realize at the time that what Miami-Dade College was an institution that served as an oasis of hope for an opportunity for people in the community. And when I enrolled and they accepted me, and man, let me tell you, I dove into my books because I didn't want anybody to come to me later on and say I didn't belong here. But at Miami Dade as a student, I had an opportunity to develop, be a part of student organizations. I even started one while I was there called the Society of Law and Community Service, and that was formed out of in the paralegal department. But ran across amazing people. Matter of fact, some of the greatest change makers out there today came through Miami Dade, and so I guess you could say it's like an incubator for people that's destined to do great things.
You tell the story in your book about a trip to Tallahassee that you made with some of those student leaders, and they eventually became big advocates and led to the Dream Act and some of the other measures that came out of the Obama administration. And it seems like you discovered your purpose there. And right after this break, we're going to talk about how you transform your pain into purpose and set the trajectory for a historic mission, a historic journey that you embarked on. So stay with us. We'll have more from the history maker, Desmond Meade, right after this break. We are back with the President and Executive Director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, Desmond Meade. And Mr. Meade, we were discussing before the break the role of purpose and how did you discover your purpose and how did that purpose drive you into doing the historic work that you would go on to do?
Well, Dr. Bright, I think that's a great question. And I could say that it was a chain of events that happened like after I crossed the railroad tracks, really stopping and thinking about if I would have died that day, how many people would come to my funeral. And that question caused me to really think hard about, what have I been doing with my life, and it just so happened that Rosa Parks had passed away later on that year, and I was really inspired, and believe it or not, to actually have a big funeral. I wanted to feel as if I made some type of contribution to society, and people were appreciative of that. And in my head, the funeral, the type of funeral that I was imagining was, ironically similar to what we've seen for Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gigi, that memorial service. I had something like that, in my head. But I knew that in order to do something like that, I had to make a significant contribution to society. And I end up, stumbling on the fact that, listen, maybe I can take the pain and suffering and those things that caused me to go to those railroad tracks and use it in a way to help others. And so eventually I decided to commit my life to advocating for the least among us, advocating for foster care, people aging out of foster care, advocating for the homeless, for returning citizens or people who've been impacted by the criminal justice system. And I found that that was my niche, that was my calling, and me being able to give back gave great significance to my existence, right? A lot of times we want to know, what are we here for? Well, it's simple. And we're here to give back. We're here to help people less fortunate than us. And if we could take our own personal trials and experiences and use it to improve the life of someone else, then the time that we spent on this earth have been greatly used.
You spend a great deal of your life advocating for the rights, restoring the rights of returning citizens. What are some of the barriers and additional struggles that they face? and talk about Amendment 4. What does that mean, and what was the journey in terms of getting that on the ballot and eventually getting that measure passed?
Well, unfortunately, this country of ours is probably one of the worst countries in the world as it relates to just incarcerating its own citizens. And then we see, because of over policing in minority communities, that we have high rates of African American men, boys, women, and girls who come into negative encounters with law enforcement. And unfortunately, once a person is convicted, they face so many collateral consequences, right? And things about having it uh, uh, become difficult for them to find housing, to find employment. Not being able to vote in Florida for a while. Once you were convicted of a felony offense, you lost the right to vote for the rest of your life, right? Which meant that you was relegated to second class citizenship status. And a lot of that was just being driven by a narrative, right? That a person who commits a felony is an outcast and should never have anything positive happen to them. And so, ironically, when I was going around trying to get people interested in fighting for the rights of people who've been previously convicted, you were one of the first ones I ran into on the campus of FIU who didn't even know me, but somehow or another connected to that issue. I think you heard me speak somewhere before, and really help spread the message to help create a more some type of momentum around Amendment 4. And we was able to really have conversations with people about second chances, about forgiveness. So many times people think that, oh, I made a mistake, it'll never be right again, right? And that's why, if nothing else, man, I appreciate the path that God had laid out for me, because I'm an example. I made a whole bunch of mistakes. I was addicted to drugs. I've been arrested several times, but hey, look at me now, right? To go from being hooked on drugs and contemplating suicide to meeting the president of the United States, not once, but twice, to being named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time Magazine, and then recently to be awarded the MacArthur Genius Award, which is the most prestigious award an American can get, next to the Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm nothing. I'm just an ordinary guy who made some mistakes early on in his life, but show the world and anyone that's listening and watching that, man, we can overcome our obstacles. We can get through them, right? And in getting through them, we can make not only our lives, but the lives of people in our community, in our state, in our country, or even the world, a much better place.
What an incredible story, and what an inspiration you are to have been raised in Miami-Dade County, and for the 5,000 role models to have 117 chapters with thousands of boys who can be inspired by your story. It's just a blessing to have you on today. What is Amendment 4, and what did that mean, the passage of it?
Well, first of all, let me make sure I give a shout out to any of the mentees in the 500 role models who's coming out of Miami Edison Senior High. Huge shout out to them. But no, Amendment 4, man, let me tell you, Amendment 4 represents, the defeat of one of the last remaining Jim Crow laws that's been out, in our community for quite some time. We know that, after the slaves were freed, these Jim Crow laws, was created specifically to minimize the impact that the recent release enslaved people would have politically. And they found ways to intimidate people. They found ways to make it difficult, whether it's requiring people pay poll taxes before they can vote, literacy tests before they can register to vote, and just outright, incarcerating people and stripping them of the right to vote. And Amendment 4, what it did was it knocked down that last remaining Jim Crow law that basically disenfranchise people for life for being convicted of a felony offense. And so we led a constitutional amendment. We changed the Constitution, right? We didn't go and beg a politician. We went and took matters into our own hands and organize citizens all across this great state. And over 5.1 million of them voted yes for Amendment 4. And now people who may have committed crimes in the past, whenever they're through with their sentence, right, they have the right to register to vote and be a part of our democracy.
A true David versus Goliath story. What would be your final words of advice, Desmond, to the thousands of 5,000 role model students and their supporters in the community about overcoming adversity, about living in their purpose, about responding to God's call on their life?
Well, let me tell you, I used to say to take the word impossible out of your vocabulary because nothing is impossible when you have God on your side, right? And that if a person like me, who went from a crackhead to being where I am now can do it, then that means that, man, there's no obstacle that you're facing that you cannot overcome. But now I tell people, don't take the word impossible out of your vocabulary. Just recharacterize it, right? So now, impossible really means that I'm possible, right? And that means that, man, that there's nothing. If you could dedicate your life to giving back to others, to serving others, if you dedicate your life to leading with love and let love be in that guiding force, right? I promise you that there is nothing that you cannot achieve. And so I want to dare each and every one of you all to dream the grandest dreams that you could possibly dream. Do not limit your dreams. Do not limit your reality because you have what it takes within you to reach the highest heights that's out there, to surpass even the work that I've done. But there could be someone listening right now or watching right now who could very well be the next president of the United States, or maybe even something greater than that. And so don't limit your dreams, and know that all things are possible because you're possible.
You are possible. We are possible. We are unlimited. We are 5,000. Thank you so much, Desmond Meade, for joining us today. What an incredible blessing it was to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bright. Always a pleasure to see you, man.